Welcome back to Emotional Edge, where true stories of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog come to life. Today's story begins deep in the Oregon wilderness, where a quiet veteran named Ethan Ward sought peace but found something buried that would change everything. When his loyal dog Rex uncovered a hidden past, it awakened ghosts long thought dead and forced Ethan to face the truth he tried to forget. Stay with us until the end, because what they discover together will leave you speechless and remind you why loyalty is the most powerful force of all. Thank you for watching this story on Emotional Edge, where every tale reminds us that kindness, courage, and loyalty still matter. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us keep sharing heartfelt stories that bring warmth, hope, and humanity back into our world. From all of us here, and from every loyal dog and quiet hero we honor, thank you for being part of our family. Thank you for being here with us. And now, let's continue our story. The morning fog clung to the ridges like pale smoke as Ethan Ward stepped out onto the porch of his cabin, breathing in the cool mountain air that carried the faint scent of pine and rain-soaked earth. To anyone passing by, the cabin looked like the home of a man who had chosen peace. A solid wooden structure tucked deep within 20 acres of forest, surrounded by silence and light, the kind of place built for forgetting. But Ethan wasn't a man who forgot easily. His hands, rough and scarred from years of service, rested on the weathered railing as his sharp blue eyes swept the tree line out of habit more than curiosity. The habits of a soldier never truly die. They just sleep until something wakes them. At his feet lay Rex, a Belgian Malinois with a sable coat that shimmered in the daylight, his ears perked and his eyes alert, scanning the horizon with the same quiet discipline as his master. They had both seen too much: sand, fire, blood, and betrayal, and somehow survived it all. The military had called their mission a failure, a training accident gone wrong. But Ethan knew better. It had been an ambush, a setup that left his team buried under a false flag, and he had walked away carrying the ghosts of the only family he'd ever had. Rex had saved his life that day, taking a shard of shrapnel meant for him. The limp in the dog's hind leg was a small price for the bond it forged. Ethan had spent the last of his savings on this land, a place he thought the world would forget. Here, no one asked about medals or missions. Here, there were no orders, no politics, no lies, just the rhythm of the forest, the whisper of wind through firs, and the occasional distant cry of an eagle that reminded him of the sky he used to jump from at dawn. Yet, even here, peace felt fragile, like a thin sheet of glass that could shatter at any moment. Ethan spent his days rebuilding the fence, chopping wood, and repairing the cabin's roof, each motion a kind of therapy, a ritual of control. He moved with precision and silence, the same way he once cleared a room with his rifle, efficient, detached, focused. But at night, when the forest went still and the memories grew loud, he would sit beside the fire with Rex at his side, staring into the flames as if they held answers he couldn't reach. Sometimes he spoke softly to the dog, telling him things he could never say to another person, the faces of his fallen brothers, the betrayal that had ended it all, the guilt that came with being the one who lived. Rex listened without judgment, his dark eyes reflecting the flicker of the fire like embers of a shared pain. For a brief time, Ethan believed he had finally outrun the noise, the violence, the endless cycle of duty and loss. But peace is never a gift, it's a truce, and truces don't last forever. It began subtly, with strange sounds at night, a distant engine where there shouldn't be one, faint voices carried by the wind, the feeling of being watched from the tree line. Ethan brushed it off at first. Paranoia was an old companion. But when Rex's head would lift suddenly, ears twitching, muscles tense, and a low growl vibrated from his chest, Ethan knew it wasn't his imagination. Something, or someone, was moving closer to the world he had built. One late afternoon, As the light turned gold and long shadows crawled across the clearing, a vehicle appeared at the end of his gravel driveway, stirring the silence into dust. Ethan's hand moved unconsciously to his back, where a gun used to be. His heart didn't race. It never did anymore. But a familiar stillness took hold. The driver was an old man, tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and eyes sharp as broken glass. He stepped out of his truck, carrying a small wooden crate. "You must be the new neighbor," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. Ethan studied him carefully before replying, "That's right." The old man smiled faintly and set the crate down. Inside lay 2 fresh-caught trout resting on ice. "Name's Hank Miller," he said. "Welcome to Black Ridge. Not many folks last out here. The quiet can get heavy." Ethan gave a slow nod. "That's why I came." Hank's eyes softened, understanding more than the words said. "I figured," he murmured, glancing at Rex. "Good-looking dog. He's seen what you've seen, hasn't he?" Ethan looked down at the animal, who stood tall beside him, proud and silent. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He has." Hank's gaze turned serious then, the light fading in his eyes. "Then do yourselves a favor. Keep watch. Things aren't as quiet as they look in these woods." And with that, the old man returned to his truck and disappeared down the trail, leaving Ethan standing in the amber light, the dog pressed close to his leg. The peace he had built now carried an echo, a question he couldn't shake. As the forest swallowed the last sound of the engine, Ethan whispered to the wind, "What did you mean, old man?" Rex gave a soft whine, staring into the darkening woods. Somewhere beyond the trees, the first ripple of trouble was already moving toward them. The next morning dawned bright and sharp, the kind of mountain day that looked peaceful, but carried a cold undertone of unease. Ethan Ward woke before sunrise, as he always did, moving through the quiet cabin like a man who had never forgotten how to live by routine. The smell of coffee filled the air, and the steady rhythm of his movements matched the steady beat of Rex's paws across the wooden floor. Outside, mist still clung to the pine trees, curling around their trunks like ghosts reluctant to leave. Ethan stood on the porch, mug in hand, scanning the tree line out of habit. The forest seemed still, but stillness didn't mean safety. In his world, it never had. He had spent years learning to read the world through subtle signs. A bent blade of grass, a broken branch, a silence too perfect. Now those instincts were whispering again, faint but insistent, that his new beginning wasn't as untouched as he wanted it to be. Later that morning, he drove into the nearest town, a small cluster of weathered storefronts called Silver Creek, to buy supplies. The locals glanced at him the way people in small towns always look at strangers, with curiosity, with distance, and maybe with a bit of fear. Ethan ignored the stares, focusing on the sound of Rex's nails clicking on the floor of the general store as the dog followed him closely. The man behind the counter, broad-shouldered and red-faced, nodded politely, but said nothing. It wasn't hostility. It was the cautious respect reserved for someone who clearly carried a past. As Ethan paid for his supplies, a voice called from behind him, firm, measured, with a hint of authority. "You must be the one who bought the old Miller property." Turning, he saw Sheriff Maya Lopez, her brown hair tied back, badge glinting in the sunlight that streamed through the dusty windows. Her expression was calm but assessing, her sharp eyes moving from Ethan's face to Rex and back again. "That's right," he replied evenly. "Just keeping to myself." Maya gave a small nod. "Keep it that way," she said. "We don't get much trouble here. Would like to keep it that way." There was no threat in her voice, just an unspoken understanding. Ethan respected that. When he returned home that afternoon, Hank Miller's old truck was waiting in his driveway, the engine idling softly. Hank leaned against the hood, smoking a pipe, his weathered face drawn tight, with something that wasn't fear but wasn't far from it either. "You've had visitors," Hank said without preamble. Ethan frowned. "What kind of visitors?" The old man took a slow puff, watching the smoke rise. "Suits, from Silver Trail Development. Said they were surveying for a new resort, something to bring jobs. But I've seen enough of these men in my life to know when a project's just a cover. He nodded toward the forest. They were asking about your land, specifically. Ethan's pulse stayed calm, but his mind sharpened instantly. Why mine? Hank shrugged. Because it sits on the old freight route, used to run supplies through those hills 50 years ago. But nobody builds resorts up here. Too remote, too unstable. Whatever they're doing, it ain't tourism. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The wind whispered through the pines like an old warning, and Rex paced restlessly, ears twitching at every creak of the cabin. At one point, the dog stopped suddenly, head lifted, body rigid. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Ethan followed his gaze toward the edge of the clearing. For a moment, he thought he saw movement. Just a flicker of something metallic between the trees, catching the moonlight. Then it was gone. He stepped outside barefoot, the cold earth grounding him, the air sharp with pine and distance. Silence. Only the forest breathing. Yet the feeling remained, that someone had been there, watching, measuring the distance between them. By dawn, Ethan was already working, his movements precise, deliberate. He fixed the fence along the southern boundary, repaired the padlock on the gate, and cleared brush from the narrow road that led to the main trail. Every task was a meditation, every swing of the axe an act of defiance against the unease coiling tighter inside him. Hank showed up around noon with a sack of nails and a quiet look that said he felt it too. "You're building walls, son," Hank muttered, handing him a hammer. "But walls only keep things out for so long." Ethan didn't look up. "Then I'll keep building." Hank studied him for a moment before nodding. "You remind me of the man I used to be, always ready for the next fight. Just remember, sometimes the enemy doesn't knock. Sometimes it smiles, shakes your hand, and asks if you'll sell." When the sun began to set, painting the forest in gold, Ethan and Rex stood at the edge of their property, looking toward the valley where Silver Trail had begun clearing trees. The sound of heavy machinery carried faintly through the air, distant but unmistakable. "They're moving fast," Hank said. "Too fast for permits." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then this isn't business. It's something else." Hank gave a slow, grim nod. "You're right. I've seen that look before. Men pretending to build when all they're really doing is burying something." The old man climbed into his truck and paused before driving away. "Be careful, Ethan. You came here to bury ghosts, but some ghosts don't stay buried." As his truck disappeared down the dirt road, Ethan stood still. Rex pressed close beside him. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sawdust, oil, and something darker, a promise of conflict. He looked down at his dog and whispered, "Looks like the quiet's over, boy." Rex's ears flicked forward, eyes locked on the tree line as if he understood every word. Somewhere beyond those pines, a threat was growing roots. And Ethan? Ward knew he'd soon have to become the soldier he swore he'd left behind. The following days unfolded under a deceptive calm, the kind that made even the birds sound cautious. The sunlight streamed through the pines, the air crisp and clean, but beneath that peace was a hum, an invisible tension Ethan Ward could feel in his bones. He worked along the fence line with Rex at his side, the rhythmic swing of his hammer steady, his shirt damp with sweat despite the chill. Every so often he'd stop, listening to the forest, scanning for a sound that didn't belong. The old instincts had returned completely now. His mind was alert, his muscles coiled, his senses razor-sharp. Rex mirrored his every move, ears twitching, nose to the wind, tail rigid. They were soldiers again, not homesteaders. The quiet that once comforted Ethan now felt like a held breath waiting to break. That afternoon, while Ethan was deep in the woods cutting down a fallen fir, he caught faint laughter carried through the trees, young, harsh, careless. He turned off the chainsaw, listening. The noise came again, closer this time, along with the roar of dirt bikes tearing up the access path. Ethan's eyes narrowed. No one came up here without a reason. He started moving back toward the cabin, his boots silent on the soft ground. Meanwhile, Rex had already heard them. His body stiffened, head high, a low growl vibrating in his chest. When the 3 dirt bikes burst from the trees, spitting gravel and mud, Rex was already standing in their way, his stance calm but commanding, like a soldier guarding a line no one would cross. The riders were young, maybe 18 or 19, their faces full of arrogance and cruelty. The leader, a broad-shouldered boy named Cody Thorne, son of the Silver Trail executive, revved his engine and sneered. "Well, look at that," he laughed. "Old man Ward's got himself a hero dog." His friends laughed too, circling in the mud, tearing ruts into the ground Ethan had repaired only days before. "My dad says this land won't be yours much longer," Cody shouted. "So maybe it's time someone taught you where you stand." Rex barked once, loud and commanding, but didn't lunge. He didn't need to. His presence alone was authority. But arrogance is deaf to reason. Cody dismounted, grabbing a thick branch from the ground, the smirk on his face darkening. "Let's see if your mutt still barks when he's bleeding," he said, stepping forward. Rex didn't move. His eyes stayed locked, muscles taut, ears forward, a perfect image of restraint. The boy raised the branch, his motion fast but clumsy. The strike landed with a sickening crack against Rex's head. The dog staggered, letting out a deep, broken yelp that pierced the stillness of the forest. Another blow came, then a kick, then laughter. The other 2 joined in, emboldened by the leader's cruelty. It lasted less than a minute, but to Rex it was a lifetime. When it was over, they left him crumpled in the mud beside the creek, blood mixing with the water, their bikes roaring away into the distance. When Ethan returned from the woods, the first thing he noticed was silence. Total, heavy silence. No birds, no wind, no movement. The kind of silence that meant something had gone wrong. "Rex," he called, his voice cutting through the trees. No sound. His chest tightened. He moved faster, then broke into a run. The first thing he saw were the tire tracks. Fresh, deep, chaotic. Then the broken branch, splintered and dark, with something that wasn't sap. Then he saw the trail of blood leading toward the creek. His stomach turned to ice. He followed it, heart pounding with mechanical precision, every sense focused, every nerve burning. When he reached the creek, his breath caught. Rex lay half in the water, his coat matted with blood, one side of his head swollen and still seeping red. His eyes were closed, his chest rising shallowly. For a moment, Ethan just knelt there, the world shrinking to the sound of the water and the faint whimper from his dog. Then the soldier took over. He lifted Rex carefully, his movements calm, controlled, his breath steady even as the rage inside him began to harden into something cold and absolute. Back in the cabin, he cleared the table and laid Rex down on a thick blanket by the fire. His hands worked fast. Gauze, antiseptic, pressure, breathing checks. Each motion drawn from the reflex of countless battlefield moments. "Stay with me, buddy," he whispered, his voice breaking in the quiet room. "You've been through worse. You hear me? You don't get to quit on me now." Rex whimpered softly, eyes fluttering but not opening. Ethan pressed a bandage against the wound, watching as the dog's chest rose and fell, slower each time. He knew this was beyond what he could fix. He needed help. Real help. He looked out the window toward the distant road, the sun dipping behind the trees. The nearest vet in town was too far, too exposed, too risky. But there was someone else. He grabbed his truck keys, wrapped Rex in every blanket he could find, and carried him to the passenger seat as gently as a child. The dog didn't stir. As the truck tore down the dirt road, Ethan's face was a mask of control. But inside him, something was burning. A memory of every friend he'd lost, every betrayal he'd swallowed, every ghost he'd tried to bury. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a message. Someone wanted him afraid. Someone wanted him to break. But they had chosen the wrong man. "Hold on, boy," he said through clenched teeth, eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. You're not dying here. Not like this. Rex's breathing was shallow, his head limp against Ethan's arm, but his tail gave one faint, loyal thump against the seat. It was enough. Ethan pressed harder on the accelerator, dust rising behind them like a storm. Whatever waited at the end of that road, justice, revenge, or ruin, he was driving straight into it. The tires screamed as Ethan Ward's truck tore through the winding mountain road, gravel and pine needles scattering behind it like a trail of fury. Beside him, wrapped in every blanket he could find, Rex lay motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. Ethan's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his face set in the calm of a man who had walked through chaos before. The forest outside blurred into streaks of green and grey, the sun flickering through the branches like a dying pulse. Every bump in the road made Rex whimper, and each sound tore a piece from Ethan's chest. He whispered low and steady, like he had during field missions when every word meant survival. "Stay with me, soldier. You're not done yet." When he finally turned off the main road, the old wooden sign for Dr. Helena Novak's veterinary clinic appeared through the dust, faded, unassuming, tucked behind a weathered fence. It didn't look like much, but Ethan knew it was his only chance. He burst through the door, carrying Rex in his arms like a fallen comrade. The woman behind the counter looked up sharply. Dr. Helena Novak, silver hair pulled tight, eyes sharp behind wire-framed glasses, froze for half a second, then moved with the precision of instinct. "On the table. Now," she commanded. Her voice carried the same authority Ethan remembered from battlefield surgeons. No hesitation, no wasted words. She didn't ask questions, didn't flinch at the blood. Her hands moved fast, scissors cutting fur, gauze pressing wounds, injections prepared with terrifying efficiency. "Head trauma," she muttered. "Possible skull fracture, swelling near the left temple. Did this happen today?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Less than an hour ago. He was attacked. She glanced up, her green eyes narrowing. "Attacked by what?" "By who?" Ethan said coldly. Something flickered in her gaze. Not surprise, but recognition. She'd seen soldiers like him before. The clinic filled with the sounds of machines, quiet commands, and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. Ethan stood back, motionless, his body rigid, his eyes locked on Rex. He could face gunfire, explosions, ambushes. But this helplessness was worse. The memories came in flashes. Sandstorms, shouting, Rex charging through smoke, his handler screaming commands over gunfire. And now this. Blood in the fur, a life hanging by a thread. Dr. Novak's voice cut through the haze. "You trained him yourself?" Ethan nodded once. "We served together." "Then you understand this part," she said, sliding a syringe into Rex's vein. "Now we wait." She stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel, her breathing heavy but steady. For a few minutes, silence filled the room. Only the soft hum of the machines and the ticking clock on the wall. Then she spoke again, her voice softer. "You're not just some farmer, are you?" Ethan didn't answer. She smiled faintly. "Good, because whoever did this, they weren't amateurs. That's not a random beating. It's a message." Ethan's eyes flicked to her. "You've seen this before?" Dr. Novak hesitated, then reached for a small evidence bag on the counter. Inside was a sliver of dark metallic paint, barely visible under the fluorescent light. This was lodged deep in the wound. High-grade automotive coating used on specialized vehicles, military or private contractors. Whatever hit your dog wasn't a branch. It was a weapon. She set the bag down beside him. "You made someone very nervous." Ethan stared at the fragment, anger and understanding colliding like steel on steel. "Silver Trail," he muttered. "They're not building a resort. They're covering something." The doctor studied him for a moment. "And you're going to find out what." "I already know," he said quietly. "I just didn't want to believe it." She folded her arms, her expression a blend of concern and resignation. "You're not the first man to think he could outrun the war by hiding in the woods. But whatever you left behind, It's coming for you now." Ethan said nothing. His focus remained on Rex, whose breathing had steadied slightly, the monitor beeping a little stronger. Dr. Novak placed a hand on his shoulder. "Steady, firm. He's strong," she said. "But the next 12 hours will decide if he makes it. Leave him here. I'll do everything I can." Ethan hesitated, torn between the instinct to stay and the knowledge that staying would draw danger to her door. "You don't understand," he said. "If they came for him, they'll come for me next, and anyone near me." Dr. Novak's gaze hardened. "You underestimate me, Mr. Ward. I've worked with men who bled secrets for a living. I've seen worse things than this. Go. Fight your war. I'll hold the line here." Outside, the light had turned golden, the forest stretching endlessly in both directions. Ethan stepped out of the clinic, the door closing softly behind him, and leaned against his truck, his reflection rippling faintly in the window. His reflection looked back at him, a man caught between who he was and who he had tried to become. He reached into the glove compartment, pulling out a small black burner phone. One number, one name. Noah Briggs. He hesitated, then pressed call. After 2 rings, a calm voice answered, "It's a beautiful day for fishing." Ethan replied quietly, "Storm's coming." A pause. Then Noah's tone changed, sharper, colder. "Talk to me." Ethan told him everything: Silver Trail, the attack, the paint fragment, the name Thorn. Silence followed for a long moment. Then Noah said, "I've been tracking the same name. Silver Trail's fronting for something big, the same people who set us up on Nomad." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Thornton." "Yeah," Noah said grimly. "And if they're back in play, this isn't about land. This is cleanup. We're loose ends." Ethan ended the call, the world narrowing into a single line of thought. They hadn't just hurt his dog. They had reopened the war. He looked toward the clinic's window, where he could see Dr. Novak bending over Rex's still form, her silhouette framed by golden light. "Hang on, boy," he whispered. "You and me, we've got work to finish." Then he climbed into the truck, his expression turning to stone as he started the engine. The peaceful mountains no longer looked like refuge. They looked like a battlefield waiting to be claimed. The storm came just as Ethan Ward had known it would. Not a storm of nature, but of men. The sky was bright, the air deceptively still, and yet everything felt on edge, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Ethan returned to his cabin that afternoon, his mind clear, his resolve colder than the mountain wind. Rex was still under Dr. Novak's care, fighting for his life, but Ethan could almost feel the dog's presence beside him, steadying his hand the way he always had in battle. He parked the truck a half-mile from his property, covering his trail, and approached the cabin on foot. His movements were measured, his steps silent. Every motion was pure muscle memory. Once inside, he moved the heavy stove aside and unlocked the hidden hatch beneath the hearth. The metal door hissed softly as it opened, revealing the narrow steel staircase that led to his secret bunker. It was a room built not for comfort, but for survival. Reinforced walls, weapons racks gleaming under dim lights, maps pinned to the walls, and a bank of monitors showing camera feeds from the surrounding forest. He checked each one. Clear for now, but he knew better than to trust what he saw. Silence could be the loudest warning. He sat before the monitors, the hum of machinery the only sound, and inserted a data drive into the terminal. The name Thornton flashed on the screen. The same name that had haunted every nightmare, every unanswered question. He scrolled through files, mission logs, encrypted communications, satellite images, until he found the one line that confirmed everything: Silver Trail Development. Logistics Channel. They were moving stolen military equipment through this land under the cover of a construction project. His land sat on the access route they needed. That was why Thorn had wanted it. That was why his team had died. They had stumbled onto the truth, and now the men behind it were cleaning up the last witnesses. Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. The soldier in him was fully awake now. The man who had come here to heal was gone, replaced by the one who knew exactly how to wage a quiet, efficient war. By dusk, the trap was set. He had rigged tripwires along the tree line, placed silent flares at choke points, and loaded each weapon with precision. His movements were mechanical, his breathing calm. He worked like a craftsman, sculpting inevitability. As the sun began to fade, he brewed coffee and sat in the dim glow of the single lamp, staring at the photo of Rex tacked to the wall, a picture from years ago, taken in the desert. Both younger then, both alive in a way they no longer were. "You stay alive," he murmured to the empty room. "I'll handle the rest." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a scent he recognized instantly: diesel, gun oil, and sweat. He moved to the monitors. The northern camera flickered once, then went dark. Seconds later, the eastern feed cut out. His lips tightened. "They're here." 8 figures moved through the forest like ghosts, their formation tight, their movements disciplined. These weren't thugs. These were professionals, mercenaries hired by Lucas Thorne, maybe even trained by the same agency that had trained him. They wore matte black gear, suppressed rifles at the ready, eyes hidden behind night vision lenses. Ethan watched them on the infrared feed, his pulse steady. He let them get close enough to feel confident, close enough to believe he was asleep. When the first one crossed the tripwire, a small chemical flare ignited, flooding the clearing with a soft green light. For an instant, the intruder stood illuminated, perfectly framed. Ethan's finger tightened on the trigger of his rifle. One shot, one breath, one body falling silently to the ground. The others froze, confusion breaking formation. A voice crackled through a radio, harsh and controlled. "Vipers down. Proceed with caution." They advanced. Ethan moved like a shadow, shifting between the cabin's hidden firing slits, each shot precise, each target falling before they could locate his position. Then came the voice over the comms, Alpha, the team leader. "Push in, breach and clear, no survivors." 2 men approached the back door while another team moved to the front. Ethan could hear the faint click of the breaching charge being set. He dove behind the kitchen island just as the explosion shattered the door inward. Wood splinters rained across the room, smoke curling through the light. 2 mercenaries rushed in, one sweeping left, the other right. Ethan waited, letting them expose themselves, then fired twice. The first fell instantly. The second dropped his weapon, clutching his leg as he screamed. Alpha kicked the wounded man aside and advanced, firing in bursts, his shots chewing through the thick oak counter. Ethan rolled, reloading in a single fluid motion. Then, from outside, a rifle cracked, deep and distant. One of the attackers at the front door went down, his chest torn open. Ethan glanced toward the ridge beyond the clearing. Through the storm of chaos, a faint glint caught the sunlight. The barrel of an old M40 sniper rifle. Hank Miller was there, steady as a rock, covering him from 1,000 yards away. Alpha hesitated for a fraction of a second, distracted by the noise. It was enough. Ethan rose from cover and fired 2 clean shots. The man staggered, blood blooming dark across his chest before he collapsed against the wall. Silence followed, thick, broken only by the hiss of smoke and the faint ringing in Ethan's ears. Then a shape appeared at the back doorway, a familiar one. Noah Briggs, dressed in tactical gear, rifle slung low, expression calm. "Perimeter's clear," he said. "Elias sends his regards." Ethan managed the faintest of smiles. "He's still got it." Noah stepped over the fallen mercenaries, scanning the scene. "This wasn't just a hit," he said. "This was confirmation. They wanted to see if you were still the ghost." Ethan looked around at the wreckage, the broken walls, the smell of gunpowder, the silence of victory that didn't feel like victory at all. "They found out," he said quietly. "Now they'll send more." Noah nodded grimly. "Then we send a message first." Ethan's eyes drifted to the wounded mercenary groaning on the floor, blood pooling under him. "He'll do." Together, they worked fast, staging the scene, faking radio chatter through the fallen leader's comms, feeding misinformation. When Thorne's men arrived, they'd find only ashes and confusion. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain again, and in the distance thunder rolled across the peaks. Ethan stepped out into the clearing, breathing deeply, the air thick with smoke and pine. The war he'd tried to leave behind had come to his doorstep, and this time he wasn't running. He looked toward the valley, where Silver Trail's machines still carved into the land like wounds. "You wanted a fight," he murmured. "Now you've got one." The sky above him flashed white, thunder echoing like artillery. And somewhere far away, in a sterile clinic, Rex opened his eyes. The rain came with the dawn, a steady rhythm against the roof that washed the scent of gunpowder and blood into the cold mountain air. Ethan Ward stood by the shattered window of his cabin, watching the storm fade to a drizzle. Smoke still curled from the broken wood stove, and the floor bore the scars of the battle. Bullet holes, shattered glass, footprints smeared with mud and blood. Outside, the forest stood silent again, indifferent to the violence that had just unfolded within it. Noah Briggs was by the doorway, checking weapons, his movements methodical, efficient, unspoken. "We'll have company soon," he said. "That team was supposed to report in every 30 minutes. Thorne will notice." Ethan nodded, his eyes cold and steady. "That's the idea." They had left one man alive, the mercenary with the wounded leg, now tied to a chair in the corner, his face pale with pain and fear. Every few seconds he glanced at Ethan, then quickly away, as if the sight of him was worse than the bullet. Ethan crouched down, his voice low but deadly calm. "You're going to call your boss," he said. "You're going to tell him the job's done, that I'm dead, and that he needs to see it himself." The man hesitated, trembling. "He'll kill me." Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "You're already dead. This is just you buying a few more minutes." With shaking hands, the mercenary lifted his radio. The call went out. The reply came minutes later, Thorne's voice sharp, irritated, confident. "Keep the site clean," he said. "I'll be there within the hour." When the line went dead, Noah exhaled, checking his rifle one last time. "He's coming alone?" "No," Ethan said quietly. "Men like him never do. But he'll come close enough." The two men worked quickly, positioning themselves in the shadows. Outside, the rain stopped, leaving the air heavy with the smell of pine and wet earth. Then came the low growl of an engine, a black SUV winding its way up the muddy road, headlights slicing through the mist. It stopped at the edge of the clearing, and Lucas Thorne stepped out. His expensive coat flapped in the wind, his silver hair slicked back, his expression carved from arrogance. He looked at the bullet-riddled cabin and smiled faintly, like a man admiring his own work. "Mr. Ward," he called out, his voice smooth, almost amused. "I was hoping we could talk." Ethan stepped from the shadows, his rifle steady, his expression unreadable. "You should have stayed in the city." For a moment, the two men regarded each other, two opposites shaped by the same world. Thorne's hand twitched toward the inside of his coat, but Noah was faster. In a single motion, he disarmed him, twisted his wrist until something cracked and shoved him to his knees. "Talk," Noah said. Thorne's mask of superiority cracked, revealing something meaner underneath. "You don't understand what you're playing with," he hissed. "You think this ends with me? You have no idea how deep it goes." Ethan stepped closer, his voice a low growl. "Then start explaining before I stop caring." But Thorne only laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You can't stop it. Thornton built this. The network, the roots, the clean money. I just made it look respectable." Ethan's hand tightened on the rifle, but before he could speak, headlights appeared in the distance. Another vehicle approaching fast. Sheriff Maya Lopez. The SUV stopped beside the clearing, and Maya stepped out, her uniform soaked, her face grim as she took in the scene. The armed men, the tied captive, the powerful developer kneeling in the mud. She drew her weapon, eyes flicking to Ethan. "What the hell is this?" "Justice," Ethan said evenly. "He sent those men. They tried to kill me, and they nearly killed my dog." Her gaze shifted to Thorn, then to the ruined cabin, piecing the story together in silence. Finally, she holstered her gun. "Then let's make it official." She read him his rights in a voice as steady as steel. Thorn laughed again, defiant even as she cuffed him. "You can't touch me. You think a small-town sheriff can take down a federal director's operation?" Maya leaned close, her words quiet but deadly. "Watch me." As her deputies led Thorn away, Ethan turned to Noah. "It's not over," he said. "Thornton's still out there." Noah nodded. "I know, but he's already bleeding. Your evidence dump hit the Pentagon an hour ago. The generals are tearing through everything." Ethan's eyes flicked up, a ghost of a smile crossing his face. "You pulled the trigger." "You left it loaded," Noah replied. "I just aimed." The two men stood in the soft rain, the weight of years between them. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the war inside him quiet, even if just for a moment. Hours later, the sun broke through the clouds, spilling gold across the valley. The chaos was over. Hank Miller's old truck was parked on the ridge. A faint flash of light winked once in the distance, a signal of acknowledgement from the old sniper. Ethan raised a hand in return. When he entered the cabin, the wreckage seemed softer in the morning light. He cleared the debris, reset the rifle on the table, and looked toward the photograph of his team hanging crooked on the wall. They were gone, but they had not been forgotten. Then the sound that mattered most reached him, the faint whine of a truck door opening outside. He stepped onto the porch just as Dr. Helena Novak appeared, her coat damp, her eyes tired but alive with quiet triumph. In the passenger seat, wrapped in a clean blanket, lay Rex, awake, weak, but breathing. When Ethan knelt beside him, the dog's tail gave a slow, steady thump against the seat. "Welcome back, soldier," Ethan whispered. The world seemed to exhale. For the first time in years, he felt no need to run, no enemy in. The shadows, only the steady rhythm of life returning. As the morning sun climbed higher, Ethan sat on the porch beside Rex, looking out over the endless forest. The ghosts were still there, somewhere deep in the trees, but their voices had quieted. He had fought for his home, for his friend, and for his soul. And somehow, he had won all three. The air smelled of rain and pine, clean and pure. Beside him, Rex rested his head on his knee, eyes half closed, the loyal heartbeat of a life that refused to give up. Ethan whispered into the stillness, "Peace isn't something you find, it's something you defend." And as the light broke over Black Ridge, the soldier who had once walked as a ghost finally found his dawn.